Zoe Daniel was the ABC Washington bureau chief until a few months ago. She says while Donald Trump's stance towards the protesters may not bridge the divide, it might still play well for the president's base.
Well, perhaps it will in some quarters, Bev, but I do think that a lot of Americans will support that, and particularly Donald Trump's base. He has had a stable base of support of around 35% throughout his presidency, and those people support him because of his tough, pragmatic decision-making. Many people, as you'll be aware, were horrified at the idea of American soldiers going in against Americans, but there will be a portion of the community that wants to see what's happening brought under control, and we may find that that plays positively for him politically.
And how unprecedented would it be for the federal government to send troops, US troops, into states against the wishes of governors?
Well, it does go against that very deeply ingrained American society around states' rights, and it'll be interesting actually to see how that would play, in the sense that many of those people who really embrace those states' rights and that independence and that America First attitude would be Donald Trump supporters. So they may end up with a personal conflict, in a sense. But as I said, I do think that there is a portion of the community that sees this as a form of anarchy. Certainly there's a portion of the community that sees it as partly justified due to the persecution of African Americans over many years. But there would be a portion of the community that would support what he's putting forward. The question, though, Bev, is whether he actually ever has to do it. Because often you find Donald Trump makes big statements and uses inflammatory rhetoric, but the action that follows is much more muted than the words.
How did his tone differ from other presidents at times during crises like these, do you think, today particularly?
Well, he's not a calming presence, and he rarely has been. I think we've seen it a few times where there's been a degree of personal warmth towards people in crisis situations, but in general, Donald Trump is not that president who comes out with a reassuring speech to calm people in a time of crisis. That's not his way. His way is to make big statements indicating big actions. A lot of Americans probably at this time would have hoped for someone who would come out and be more reassuring or do something that seemed to be more warm or even more personal towards the protesters. I saw someone today suggest that some presidents in the past have invited protesters into the White House for a conversation to try to pause this sort of unrest. But that was not Donald Trump's decision to do that, and that's not necessarily the way that he operates in the heat of the moment. We may see that happen in coming weeks, though. Yes,
and even that image of protesters being cleared by tear gas just to create a photo opportunity doesn't seem to give him pause. In your observation of covering US politics, covering the White House for so many years, do you think his presidency has caused some of this divide that we're now seeing playing out?
Look, Donald Trump has been heavily criticised for his inflammatory statements and his penchant for inflaming division and then using that for political gain. It's a kind of a divide and conquer strategy. Everyone would be aware of the various comments that he's made about women, about minorities, things like calling Mexicans racists, a general negative attitude towards people of colour. So from that perspective, you could argue that He's made people in those groups feel more vulnerable, and certainly there has been a documented uptick in hate crimes towards people of minority races and religions in the United States during his presidency. That said, what's happened in the last week is something that runs much deeper, and it is around decades of persecution, mistreatment of African Americans, particularly in regard to the way that they are treated by police, and the fact that they're, in my mind, expected to abide by a particular system of law and order that they're not protected by. And we've seen this boil over several times, and this is just another example of that. The big question is whether it will actually change anything. I fear that we will see this play out and then it will die away again until the next African American man is killed by a police officer.
Zoe, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Bev.